You've reached Monster 911, and I'm Lance Hightower. I've been taking cryptid emergency calls for over 5 years. If you have a cryptid emergency, please call our toll-free number 866-306-8085. I can help you. What's your emergency? Good evening, everybody, and welcome once again to Monster 911. Tonight on the show, we've got another patron members-only video from the Vault, which we're releasing on YouTube. Just for you. That's because we value you. You guys are amazing, and I really appreciate all the listeners. So, we are adding some new merchandise to our website here very soon. If many of you have seen our channel intro, you've seen me wearing a prototype, and I can tell you they're really comfortable. They're a great fit. Of course, some of you have been asking, which I really appreciate that. And they've got the Monster 911 logo on there. So check out the store at www.monster911.com. And if there's something you'd like to see in the store that currently isn't there, just leave us a comment down below, and we'd love to hear from you. And this is also a great time to mention that when you do purchase any Monster 911 merch from our store, you're really helping the channel not only grow, of course, but you're assisting the eyewitnesses that I call. You're helping them cope with their creature encounter because many of these folks cannot unsee what they saw. And I, again, really appreciate that, and they appreciate that. We're really helping a lot of folks out there, guys. Now, I hope you don't mind, but this next guest did not want to appear directly on the show, so I've recorded myself narrating their story. We've left in a section that details how I go about preparing this so as to make sure you get all the most authentic version of their encounter story. It's an interview that I did back in 2018, I believe. This young lady who worked in law enforcement lived in a small town in south central Oklahoma. So listen in what this narration on what this young lady had told me regarding what both she and I now believe was a Dogman creature that followed her, of all places, back to her home. I did this interview back last year, and this was a very nice lady that called in. She didn't want to be identified, so she asked if I would do a narration. I said, no problem. So she is in law enforcement, and what I do when I do narrations is I do record. This was about a 2-hour recording with her. And so what I do is I go back through and listen and type out very much word for word how the person told me of their encounter or experience, and I try to use the inflections where they had and everything. But she was down to earth. I found her just full of grit, a very driven young lady. So we're just going to get right into it and some of the things she experienced here. And I've got about 8 pages in front of me here, so let's just get right to it. So as I said, this was a very nice lady. She called me and left a message on our toll-free number. She said that she was from the southern part of Oklahoma, and she lived in a relatively small town, which she did not want to be identified since it was small, and was situated near a very hilly area. Her occupation was in law enforcement, and she'd been in this occupation for about a decade, and she didn't want me to mention what part of law enforcement that she was in, but she loved it, and her husband was in the same part of law enforcement as she was in. She was in her 30s, married, and had 3 kids. She frequently goes for walks, she mentioned to me, at night, since it's cooler, and she's done this for a number of years, and she didn't want to get out of the routine of doing this because her shift, she would get off between 1 and 2 a.m. in the morning, which was a little bit different than her husband's shift, but she was so used to this, she would, when she would get home, she would change into her walking gear and grab her dog, and they'd go for a walk, and sometimes she would take her daughter. And so she was heading out, and by the time she headed out, it was around, say, 3 o'clock. And she said that she'd been doing this for a number of years. She normally would walk to the middle school in town from where she lives, but on this particular night, she decided to walk up to the high school in town in order to get her steps in a little bit quicker this evening. And so she was just wanting to go there and walk up and down the parking lot. As she stated, she brought her dog with her on this particular walk. And he's about a medium-sized dog, she stated. So when she did get to the high school, she was beginning to walk around, and she states that the school has recently undergone some new renovations. So it's a lot bigger, it's more expansive. The area of the school has a lot more acres of ground, she said, now than it used to. She said, when you approach the high school, Lance, there's a big cafeteria on the right, and down the sides are just windows. It's black on both sides. So it's just practically glass on both sides of this building, the cafeteria. Then on the other side of this cafeteria building is a middle school. And then beyond the middle school is a library. And then past this building is a small building which is a portion of the high school. And across from this is the music. And then even across from this building is a complex of the high school. So it's kind of an expansive acreage area that they've expanded this new school grounds. And so it's pretty good to get your exercise in. And if you walk the parking lot, you can get a full mile in, she said. I asked again approximately what time was this. She said somewhere between 2 and 3. She's not exact because sometimes she wouldn't get off work at an exact time, but it was somewhere around this ballpark time. So while on this particular walk around the school grounds, she was about at the small building that's a portion of the high school. She stopped to get a drink, and so she took a drink and also gave some water to her dog. Well, she was also taking, at the same time, she was talking to a good friend on the phone, which is not abnormal, she said. She said sometimes she'll talk on the phone and walk and have her little dog by her side. It's kind of a common occurrence, so no big deal. And it's a very good friend of hers, and they talk, and he likes to chat with her just to keep her safe, give her some company. And she said she's always talking and walking every time she goes out, practically. And this particular friend is still on the job, but he's just checking on her for safety, so they talk. She said that it kind of freaks her husband out a lot to know that she's walking this early in the morning around town. And so her husband feels better that at least she's talking on the phone with someone while she's out this early walking around. But again, she's done it for so long, he's kind of gotten used to it, and so that's just kind of her routine. So while she's talking, her friend on the phone noticed that he wasn't hearing any noises over the phone while she's chatting. He said to her, "There's no June bugs, there's no birds, nothing." Then she said, "You're right, that's odd." He said, "Yeah, I don't hear anything in the background." At first there was all kinds of noises, then now silence, which kind of freaked her out because she didn't really notice it before, but her friend had just mentioned it to her. So she said to her friend, "I think I'll be heading back home now." So when she was somewhere around the library, she started hearing the neighborhood dogs barking all of a sudden. The barking started a ways down the neighborhood, but with more and more dogs barking, like someone or something was agitating the neighborhood dogs, as something was getting closer to where I'm at right now. Now, she said that she was looking toward the main road, toward the middle school, and the middle school's on the west side, and the cafeteria is on the east, so she's walking in between these two buildings. The school grounds are well lit, she said, and wasn't sure what caught her attention, but she happened to look up instead of at the ground. Now, she said that from this vantage point, she can typically see car lights reflecting off of the cafeteria windows. If the cars are coming down this big hill that's close by, she can see the lights reflecting in the cafeteria windows, which again are blacked out like dark window tint. So as she looked up about the time when the neighborhood dogs were barking like in a frenzy that had now migrated close to the school grounds, her little dog crouched down and began to growl, barking toward the cafeteria. And when she looked up, she saw a large black shadow. She couldn't make out any features to it at all, but it was going down the sides of the cafeteria. Now, mind you, she said, when I typically see car lights reflecting in these windows, the car lights are bigger, near the closest windows near you, with the reflection of lights getting smaller further away down the building as you go, toward the end. These windows are large panes of glass, Lance, and whatever this black shadow was, it filled up the entire window pane of the glass as it ran down the entire length of this building. It was really big, she said. You know, when the cars go by, you can kind of tell, she said, from their headlight reflection in these windows about how fast the cars are going. And this particular area down this hill, most cars are traveling about 20 to 30 miles per hour. And I was just far enough away that I couldn't make out any details and features, but I could see whatever this black shadow mass was, it was moving a lot faster than the typical car lights, headlights reflecting that I'm used to seeing in these windows. It moved much faster than any typical car light reflections, and it was irritating all of the neighborhood dogs that were going crazy, practically waking up the entire neighborhood by now. I have no idea what I just saw, I said to myself. She said, I'm kind of freaking out. My little dog is barking like crazy, and all of the neighborhood dogs are going ballistic. My dog is backed up against me, sitting literally on my feet in a protective stance trying to protect me. His little hindquarters are right on my feet, and he's just barking in a frenzy. I asked about how far she was from this dark figure. She stated, if I was to guess, Lance, I was about 100 yards or so away. Then I asked if she could tell if it was running on all fours or two legs. She said, honest to God, I couldn't tell you. It just looked like a black blob moving extremely fast. Again, faster than any of the car light reflections I'm used to seeing in these cafeteria windows. I know it was massive, whatever it was. I'm not one to be freaked out too often, being in law enforcement, but I was at this point in time. She said, all I knew is that I had to get under a lit light pole, since there are cameras at these poles, and if anything should happen to me, at least there'd be a camera on me and someone would know where to find my body. She kind of chuckled a little bit, but you could tell she was nervous when she said this. So I turned and walked toward the small building until I knew that this thing was completely out of the area. I listened for the dogs barking slowly dissipate and leave. Now, mind you, my friend is still on the phone, listening to all this and listening to me. He can hear all this dog barking going on and everything too, and there aren't any dogs really close to the high school, Lance. So these dogs were really carrying on a bit of a big ruckus quite a distance from the school to be so loud that even my friend on the phone was asking what the heck is going on out there. It was just regular barking. It wasn't just like regular barking, Lance. It was like a gnarly barking noise. So when I get to the smaller building, I stop to get a drink of water and give some to my dog, and I go back around the parking lot area to where I came from. So I have to walk down this hill, the one that I just came up, on the street near this housing addition. That used to be an empty field or something, but again, the homes are booming in this area, so there's a new housing addition there now, and she lives at the bottom of this hill. So as she was walking through this housing addition, she began to hear the wave of dog barking coming back toward her back behind her. Her dog's heart was pounding so hard, she said, that she could almost feel it, the heartbeat through the dog leash, she said. This is how crazy he was. My little dog was growling and barking and just going ballistic. I've never seen him like this. He was running in circles around me, barking all around me, just frantically upset and extremely agitated that something was close by. And as the wave of dog barking grew upon her as she was walking down the street, her friend, who was still remaining on the phone, said, "Listen." And she said, "What?" He said, "Listen. You need to listen." So she picked up her dog and placed the hand over her dog's mouth so it would be quiet. And then when she noticed, listening to her friend on the phone, that all the dogs in the area had stopped, everything suddenly went quiet. What she heard then above anything else and everything else, really was hard to describe, she said. She said, Lance, if I had to put a description to the sound I was to hear next, it was almost like a yowling howl. And I said, a yowling or howling? She said, not howling, yowling. It probably is the best description I can give. I know it's not great, but that's the best description, a yowling. And it was loud and long. She said, you know when you stub your toe really hard and you scream? You kind of take the sound you make from this and mix it with dogs' howl. You kind of have what I'm talking about as far as the type of howl I'm talking about. It's a yell and howling mixed. It's something that I've never heard before, Lance. And then I asked if it was sustained. She said yes, but that wouldn't even call it like a true dog's howling like you hear in the movies or on TV. It was much different of a sound, one that she's never heard, and the best description she could give of it was this yowling sound, and it was long and loud. I asked about how close she thinks that this yowling was from her. She said, I really don't know, Lance. I'm not sure, but it was close, real close. As soon as it started this strange yowling noise, all of the dogs in the area went quiet until it stopped. Then, as soon as this yowling stopped, it's almost as if someone dropped a bomb in the area. Then all of the dogs in the neighborhood went ballistic again in a massive barking frenzy, even including my dog, who I had my hand still over its muzzle. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, she said. This kind of feeling she got, like something is startling you, she said, made her very, very uneasy. She says, I don't scare easy, Lance. I'm in law enforcement, and I've been in law enforcement like for 10 years, so I'm not easily spooked. But at this point, I was frighteningly excited. I said, what? She said, well, I know this sounds strange, but I get kind of excited when I get frightened, like I'm glad to be there, but I'm not glad to be there. I'm somewhere in the middle of what's going on right now. I'm in the middle of this, whatever it is. I'm between panic and excitement. And I'm thinking, this is an awesome feeling. I don't want to be here, but I'm glad I'm here. She said, I know that doesn't make any sense, but that's about the best description, Lance. I thought, wow, most folks in this situation wouldn't necessarily call this moment an exciting moment or neat, but she did. Again, she had some grit to her. So she said, I had my dog in my arms, and I turned, and my friend was still on the phone, and he said, where the blank are you? I said, I'm still in town, going down the hill. You know, I'm almost to my house. I tell him where I'm at, and I'm walking down such and such hill in this housing condition in town. This is in town. Again, Lance, it's in town. Not outside in the country. It's in town in this small community. This is what is crazy to me, she said. Most of the encounter stories that I've heard on your show has been folks seeing things while out in the country. But this is in town. This is what's crazy. I'm in a housing addition. They're building houses all over in this area, nice houses. She said, so I have my dog in my arms and I go to run down this hill because I'm at the point where I don't think myself and my dog are going to be much protection, especially my dog. He's not much protection. He's a sweet pet, but he's not a big dog by no means. So I have him in my sidearm, and I don't have my pepper spray. I don't have my firearm on my hip. I've got my walking clothes on. All I have is a little dog in my arms, and that's it. I have my friend on the phone, so if something really happens to me, at least there will be someone to know what happened to me, especially if they can't find, again, she said, my body for a couple of weeks. She laughed in a nervous gesture, but I could tell that she was kind of serious in what she just said. So she goes running down this hill, and she's kind of got off a little bit to the side after running a bit, and she saw a police officer pull up. She said, now mind you, the police knew that I had been walking early in the morning quite often for a long time, so this was my routine. So it wasn't a surprise to see me out. They had come upon me several times, and in the summertime, I would walk with my little girl. Actually, sometimes we would go for a walk together, and this was our time together to visit and get some exercise in. This was about the best time I had getting off from work. And the police thought it was a good idea also to walk at night, since during the day it was so hot and you could easily get dehydrated. So the evening, being cool, was a perfect time for me. So as the police officer pulled up, he said, "Say, do you know what's going on?" She said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, you hear all these dogs." She said, "Yeah." She then removed her hand off her dog's muzzle that she had her arms with, and she said when she did this, her dog turned its head back behind her as she was talking to this officer and began barking while she was standing there talking to the police officer. So she had to place her hand back over her dog's muzzle in order for her dog to start barking, because she was trying to speak to this officer who just pulled up. She said, so whatever it was, Lance, she thought it was back up the hill, back the direction she had just ran from. And she said that she still had this feeling of being watched at this point, even talking to this officer. The police officer asked me again if I knew what was setting the dogs off, because he knew that it wasn't me, because I've been walking this area forever, and the dogs have never barked like this. They just don't start going off barking in a frenzy like this with me walking. We've even had a pack of wild dogs, she said, in the area. And they've not even set off these dogs like this in this neighborhood before, with the dogs going crazy like this. So he felt, and I felt, that it probably wasn't any wild dogs. I've even had a deer jump in my back fence to eat some grass, and my dogs won't even bother with them. The dogs in the neighborhood won't bother deer. It's such a common occurrence. So I've shared this with a few others about this experience, Lance, and I've never had anything like this happen during the 25 years of living in this small town. So back to the police officer and me talking. So this officer said that the police station had had a wave of calls from locals saying that something is disturbing the animals in the area tonight. And when I asked him what he meant, he said that the cattle was upset, some farmers had called in, and that some of the cattle had even broke down a fence just on the outskirts of town, not too far where she was at, to the point where they had gone into a stampede. And she was thinking, what? And that they've even received calls from folks down the neighborhood and down by the high school of house pets being upset and carrying on like crazy, and the pet owners were trying to find out what the heck was going on. He said, so they were trying to figure out what was going on and if I had seen anything. She said, I didn't see anything up close, but I did share what I saw running against the cafeteria building. It was huge. Then he asked me if I thought it could have been a bear. And she thought, we don't have bears in this area. She didn't say that aloud, but she was thinking it. I stated to her that if it had been a bear, bears have a very distinct way about their movement, and plus they won't take up space of the windows of the size that she was referring to earlier. And they don't make this yowling sound that she heard. She said, I agree, Lance. I know. I'm thinking this to myself when he asked this. She said, now look, she said, I'm not a skinny chick. I'm rather a large chick. So this is why I walk. I'm trying to lose some weight, and my little dog would be a snack to a bear. So this was, if this was a bear, he would have looked at both of us and said, yummy snack, both of them. We both chuckled with this comment she made, but I did understand what she had a good point. In other words, she knew that what occurred wasn't a bear, what she saw and what was going on in the neighborhood. I then restated to her that most bears want to get away from humans. Most do. They typically are skittish around public venues. They really don't like being within any town limits, especially when there are dogs around, and she also agreed. I said bears can go rogue occasionally and get into public places such as dumpsters when they're starving or when they're being fed or when smells and odors are so overwhelmingly pleasing and unresistible that they have to move closer to find out. But again, typically this doesn't happen all too often, I believe. And again, she agreed. She went on to say that this officer asked her if it could have been a large dog causing this disturbance. She said, no, this is bigger than any dog I've ever seen, she said. I have friends, Lance. She said to not the officer, but to me, she said, Lance, I have friends with big dogs, bull mastiffs, Great Danes, and they're about the size of a small pony, literally. And what I saw was so much bigger than these dogs. It had to be the size, honestly. She kind of hesitated here. She said, a small car. Yeah, a small car, Lance. Maybe even bigger. It was huge, whatever it was, and fast. Again, all I saw was the shadow of this thing. It was very big and super fast. It was too fast for a human and too big. There was nothing else I can compare it to for it to be just but one of these, and she hesitated. She said, one of these Dogman type of creatures that you guys are talking about. This is why I contacted you. I seriously think what I saw that night was one of these Dogman creatures. I really do. But I thought that this officer was kind of making fun of me by the way he acted and what he said. But it's almost like he may have known something and was saying it in jest to see how I would react to what he said. At least it appeared to me this way, she said. At this point, I explained some of the various statements of what some of our guests have had described. By the way, law enforcement has behaved typically when they ask questions regarding what a guest saw, or when local law enforcement is blockading off an area for these government MIBs to go into an area, investigate, remove, or clean up a scene. The local law hasn't practiced exactly what to say regarding these cryptids when something occurs that is of these creatures. So it's really, really evident that when they do say something, they have not practiced what to say, so the person asking knows something's up. Something just doesn't feel right, sound right, when a local deputy sheriff or local law enforcement says what's going on that's really not. They just know something's up, which is what may have been this particular instance when this officer was vaguely skirting around asking you and seeing what your reaction was going to be. Who knows? So this has happened a lot, I told her. I said there's a number of instances where there'll be a road blockaded, and someone will say, hey, local officer, what's going on? There's some escapees. All right, well, how many are there? And then he just kind of goes silent. And so the person asking, 1, 2, 5, 10, what? Yeah, there were 2. So you just kind of know something was up. So then she said, this actually gets a bit weirder too, Lance. I said, oh, please tell. She goes on to say that the officer actually offered her a ride home, and she said, I'm only a block away from my house, and since you pulled up, the hair on the back of my neck fell down, so I feel a little bit better. Thank you so much for stopping. I feel fine. I just need to get home and get the rest of my stuff done. So from there, he left, and so I ran home the rest of the way carrying my little dog. Okay, she said. So the very next night when I got home, which was around 1 a.m. to 2:30 in the morning, somewhere around there, she said, I got out of my vehicle, which was in the garage. The garage door went up. I parked my car in the garage. And I went into the house. I had a rental car. I was using a rental car on this particular night because my SUV was being fixed at the shop. So I had my garage door opener in my hand. It's one of those garage door openers that's really small on a fob that's attached to my keychain. So it's really hard, I've noticed, to accidentally hit this garage door button on this fob. You have to be looking for it, and you have to intentionally physically look at the button to find it. It's so small. And then you have to press really firm to activate it to open or close the garage door. So you rarely hit it by accident. So I laid my stuff. I just had a handful of stuff in. I still had my groceries in the car. So I laid my stuff that was in my hands on the table where I usually do lay things, because I had gotten some groceries I needed to go back out. And I was going to head out there and grab it. She said, now we have a door attached to the house. It's inside the garage that you can just enter the house from there. And I had shut the door. Well, as I was laying my stuff down on the table, I heard my garage door going down. I thought, "Okay, this is weird. This has never happened before," she said. At this point in our conversation, she pardoned herself for a second. I could hear her talking to someone, and I heard another voice in the background. I could hear her say that she was parked at her present location in order to get a better reception, because at her home the reception was terrible. The background noise said, "Okay," so she got back on the phone with me. She said it was a local police officer just checking out and just making sure she was okay, which she did. She said that she was, and that this is about the best place to get a better reception when she was talking with me on the phone. She said, "Lance, I'm sorry for the interruption here." And I said, "No, that's okay." She said, "You used to come up here and they would never see a cop at all where I'm at. Now, after this incident, you see them patrolling all of the time, everywhere." I said, "Well, that's good." She said, "Yeah, it's just really strange." Then she said, "I'm sorry, where was I?" She goes, "Let me get back to what I was telling you." She said, "So I had just laid down my car keys and the garage door opener and a few items in my hands to go back out and get groceries." And she goes, "Now, mind you, I'm still dressed in my uniform. I have my gun on my hip and everything. So as the garage door is going down, I'm thinking, if someone was someone dumb enough to follow me in the garage with having a gun on my hip? They're asking to get shot." And I said, "Right, yeah." She goes, "I've got my kids in my house, my mother, my husband's asleep, and I ain't going to let anybody do anything to them." And I knew in talking with her just what little I knew she had some grit. I knew she meant business. So I walked toward, she said, "Lance, I walked toward the door that enters into the garage. It was shut. I'd shut it behind me. And I go to grab the doorknob on this door to go into the garage. And as I placed my hand on the knob to turn it, the knob turned the opposite direction." I then interjected, "What?" She said, yeah, I could physically feel the garage door knob turning against me, resisting me, wanting to turn the knob in order to open this door. I grabbed then with both hands, trying to turn the knob, and I could definitely feel the resistance against me, that someone was on the opposite side of the door, was turning the opposite direction I was. Someone was in the garage. So there was definitely, I don't know what it was, Lance. At this point, I thought it was a person, and we ended up jamming the door with them turning opposite me. I couldn't turn the knob anymore. It was like locked and stuck. The door wasn't able to open. Her husband, who also worked in the same area of law enforcement, as I said, she yelled, getting him up out of bed and telling him, yelling through the house what was going on. And she was yelling, "Somebody's in the garage door's down, the door's jammed." And so he ran to the jammed door where she was at, and to the in the house. He jumped out of bed. He told her to go around to the front of the garage on the outside. Again, she still had her sidearm on her hip. He's thinking maybe that someone had followed her, was some person in the garage, as she did too. Again, she reiterated to me that she's still in full uniform with her gun on her hip and everything. So she said, "I call 911, Lance. I got him on the phone. I'm telling this person there might be someone potentially had followed me to my house. They're in my garage. The garage door's shut. And what had happened?" And she's walking toward the front door of her home. She's inside. She walks outside. And as she's getting ready to, she's around the side of the garage is attached to the house. And as she's to the side of the garage, she hears the garage door up. It was that instance where it had just stopped going up. Then she said, as she got around to the house, she began to walk around the front slowly. And as she came around, the garage door was back open with the garage door light on. She said, "You know how the garage door, when it comes up all the way, the light's still on." She says, "Well, this was still on. Whatever it was gone." There was nothing in the garage, and nothing was touched, nothing missing or stolen at all. I asked her, "Can someone open the garage from inside?" She said, "Yes, there's a big number pad next to where the side door is that enters the house, the door that was jammed. and you can just push the big button below the numbers and the garage door will go up with the light coming on. Shortly after, the cops arrived and she explained to the cops what had happened, and they were just puzzled and baffled as we were. At this time, she began to explain that her and some of her neighbors over the years had had some odd or strange things also happen, like frequent tapping on her window outside of her bedroom, and there was never any tracks found around the outside of her window. That's what was strange. She said that she really thinks that this kind of stuff has been going on for a long time, but folks really don't want to talk about things like this when it occurs. But this garage door incident really kind of freaked her out, especially after what had happened the night before. And luckily, she's kind of relieved because now they're moving out of the area anyway. They're not moving out necessarily because this had happened. They had already planned to move, but it's kind of good that they were moving out because the timing was perfect. But she wasn't going to keep her kids there until they moved. She was taking them to her mother's until they were fully moved into the other location. This just freaked her out too much. I asked her what the others think or had said when she shared what had occurred. She said that maybe it was a prowler that ran out, or that I accidentally hit the garage door opener, but it doesn't really explain the garage door resistance turning opposite of my rotation on the knob. This doorknob isn't hard to open, Lance. I've opened it a million times. There's nothing wrong with it. It's old, but it opens easy. So I knew this wasn't it. Some say it was a bear possibly, but this makes no sense. Actually, some say it was a Sasquatch, and some say that it was a wolf man. I don't know, Lance. Of course, I was quiet at this point, just in amazement and just listening. I explained that based on what I'm hearing her describe and trying to be reasonable and logical here, could it have been a human? Sure, but not likely. What or where I'm leaning toward is the high probability of what this was being what we call a dogman, just because of their ability to turn knobs based on a high number of encounters, their level of intelligence and boldness, and what had occurred the night before, which I do believe are all related and tied into each other. She agreed and felt the same way, that everything is tied into each other, and that whatever this was, it was extremely smart. Smart enough to know what to push inside the garage door and how to turn a doorknob. I also explained to her that this is how this thing or creature, that's what we're saying at this point, may have found her and followed her inside the garage, was its keen olfactory or sense of smell acuity that led it to her home. She said, "That's interesting you say that, Lance." I said, "Oh?" Because I'm not sure if this is somewhat related or not, but I was on my monthly cycle during this time, and she was quiet for a moment. I asked again that if she had had a long history of this tapping on her window, and she answered yes. And then I asked if any of her neighbors had had the same tapping, and she said, not to her knowledge. In fact, it was worse when they had had some bushes that her mom had planted all along the outside of the back of the house, since they couldn't afford a fence. Her brother would hear this tapping on my window, and he would grab a baseball bat and run outside. Of course, this was years ago, Lance. But then after he would run outside, he realized this wasn't the smartest thing to do and would head back into the house immediately. The tapping did reduce somewhat when they trimmed all of these bushes along the backside out, but it didn't really stop the tapping entirely. Even now, to this day, she said, Lance, we still have tapping on the windows. Not as frequent, but it still occurs. And this tapping even occurs on my girl's window. She's only 6 years old. There's no way to see her window. We have a big shelf. There's no way you can see her window when you're in a room. We have a big shelf in front of her window. But she sometimes says that she can hear tapping on the window at night. She doesn't look, she doesn't do anything, and then it goes away. And then I asked if she has any neighbors complaining of anything remotely close to this tapping on the windows. She said the neighbor next to her just moved in, and she has a little girl about the same age. But since they just moved in, she's not really sure if they have anything occurring or not, since she really doesn't know them that well. and they're moving out, so she may not get an opportunity to chat with her. I asked about where she's moving to, and then she told me. I asked, are you moving in town? She said, no, we're buying some acreage outside of this town. I was quiet for a moment, and I said, well, I'm not trying to scare you, but I want to inform you a little bit here that where you're moving to unfortunately does have a history of more Dogman encounters. And I gave her some episodes to listen to, not just take my word for it, but she can listen to these episodes. And that it was outside of this town. I couldn't tell her exactly where, but I tried to give her the best area that I thought that these encounters were taking place outside of the town she was moving to. So I don't know if you want to hear this, but I'm just wanting to give you some heads up. Stay alert. That way you're a bit more in tune to certain sounds and odd events around you, which you are now. She said, yes, I am. She paused for a moment, then she added, well, this definitely isn't good, she said. I guess we'll just have to deal with them should we encounter them where we're moving to. I said, yes. I wouldn't be totally frightened or anything like that, but just stay alert, have heads up, and always be with your little girl when she's outside. Don't leave her alone, especially in the evening or at night. But then there was something also very odd and strange that I forgot to mention to you, Lance, the night that this incident took place. A few days afterwards, a police officer had told me there had been a break-in at the local cemetery the same night of my incident, where apparently a crypt had been opened up, and that the police had had to go check it out and whatnot, and that this had been going on not only this one night, but apparently a few nights for about a month in length. She said, I believe that the moon was also full that night too. It was mostly cloudy, but I believe that there was a full moon. We had rain coming in. I don't really remember seeing the moon that night, but I think it was a full moon, and this would have been the night of the garage door incident. I then noted to her, as she may know, being in law enforcement, that there tends to be more crimes committed on full moon nights when compared to non-full moon nights, that there are statistics that show this. Well, I said, if humans have an affinity toward being somewhat affected by the moon, then why not these creatures, especially these creatures? I really think they can be affected, I said. There are some association and also with thunderstorms. Prior to, during, and immediately after thunderstorms, when these creatures tend to be very active. We're not too sure of the direct reasoning at this point, but this has occurred so much so that we know that there's some affinity with storms and high activity level and movement of these creatures. She also went on to say that she had been talking with some of the staff at the school and said they had come across quite a few dead carcasses of animals on the school grounds, and it had looked as if something large had been eating these carcasses. So some rumors were getting spread around that it was a flying creature that was flying around and sucking the blood out of animals, and that's what was going on, and that they would somehow leave bite marks showing that they were a vampire. She didn't believe any of this, but she said, I did see some of the pictures that the staff members had, Lance, and it honestly looked like a big dog. It wouldn't eat the whole animal, though. It would eat just like an upper arm, a back hind quarter, and leave the whole rest of the animal just lying there or something. She then said, I have a serious question to ask you, Lance. And I said, sure, go ahead. She asked, when my family and I move, do you think whatever it is would try to follow us where we're moving to, even though it's miles and miles away? I said, well, my initial gut instinct says no at this point. Now, I can't prove this statement or disprove. I'm just going to tell you flat out, I can't. But since you're not directly or intentionally have harmed one or killed one, my gut instinct says no at this point. I think you'll be just fine. You just need to leave as soon as you have an opportunity to do so. Now that you have an instinct for when something like this pops up, you can just, if you can't place your finger on it and something bizarre comes up, you'll now at least consider these creatures. They might be around, which having this knowledge puts you in a category of knowing more than about 90% of the general population, which has no clue of the existence of these creatures. But now you do. She said, I agree. It's better to know than not know. We discuss further a bit more about non-lethal things that folks can do to keep these creatures away from one's home and property. It's not 100% effective, but it has shown some benefit. These creatures typically are not solitary animals. They do like being apparently in a pack unit. So when you see one or encounter one, it's almost guaranteed that there are others around somewhere close by, even if you don't see them. So keep this in mind if you're ever confronted by one. Please keep that in mind, I said. She said, I will. I sure will. I thanked her immensely for sharing with me and having the courage to share her experience of what happened in the small town one night while walking a dog and what had occurred the following evening with the garage incident. We both agreed that we believed that both of these incidents were related and that what the police had shared with her regarding the cemetery break-ins were also unfortunately related to what was going on, and that this wasn't a human causing all of this weirdness within this town. Although I wasn't there with her, what she had described to me did not have the same characteristics I felt in being associated with a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch, but more related at being suspect to being a Dogman type of creature than anything else. She agreed. She definitely agreed. She didn't hesitate. She said, yes, I agree with you. And she said, I thank you, Lance, for listening to me. And I said, no, thank you for taking the time with me to share this experience. It takes a lot of courage for a person to come forward to tell this to somebody. And I will protect your name and your what exact department in law enforcement and even the town that you're in. And if you ever come across anything like this or have any questions, please don't hesitate to call me anytime. She was very sweet. She agreed and thanked me, and we hung up from here. So this incident here was very interesting. This did occur in Oklahoma, and where this occurred is around South Central. And again, lots of rolling hills, hardwoods, and this town she's in, a very small town, not unlike many towns across the U.S. And again, this occurred in town, and I think overall, even though she had a lot of grit and she was an amazing young lady, she knew something was up. Just it didn't feel right. The vibes, the area, and many people have these when they encounter these Dogman type of creatures. Many people are still unbelievers. They think this creature does not exist, but it does, folks. It does. This thing is very, I've never come across an encounter yet, not one yet in over 2.5 years, of a person thanking for the encounter that they had, that it was a great encounter when it comes to these Dogman creatures. I did want to share with you as a little bit of interesting, on a different note here, still staying on the Dogman type of subject here. I had a friend of mine who I've known a while. We've known each other. In fact, he helped me with one of the early episodes of our show. He is outside of a town called Cleveland, Oklahoma. He lives off the grid with his family, and his daughter and her husband and their children live kind of on the same piece of property. Well, in going to his property, there is another gentleman. It's a neighbor of his, and we've known each other now for about a decade. And he's a very logical guy, very scientifically minded. He works here in Tulsa, just a super guy. And so he doesn't follow too many of the shows, but he's an outdoorsman. He likes the outdoors. And when he heard of the Dogman stories that my buddy, his wife, had seen earlier, about 1.5 years ago, he just kind of kept that in mind and stayed alert. Well, this past week, he left me a message. And he said, Lance, give me a call. When I get off work, give me a call tonight. And I hardly hear from this guy. I mean, we talk occasionally, but we just, not too often. So I knew something was up. So I was dying and chomping at the bit to find out what was going on. So I called him later that night. And I said, yeah, hey, this is Lance. What's going on? He said, okay, Lance, I'm coming home. It's after 5 o'clock. It's about 5:30. He said, you know the route that I normally take to get home. I take this such and such highway. And I said, yeah, I know it. Been down there 1,000,000 times. He said, okay, I'm 2 miles from the turnoff to my home. And he said, I'm looking to my left, and there's a spot that's really flat, and usually there's deer out in this field. And I said, yep, I know exactly which one you're talking about. And he says, Lance, I'm not kidding. There had to be 40 or 50 deer out there. And I look up ahead around this corner, and I see a doe in the left ditch. And she's looking toward the deer in this field. But her tail is twitching, and her ears are kind of forward, like she's agitated, like something's not right. And she doesn't even turn to look at me. She's not in the road. She's off the left ditch in the grass area, plenty far away from the highway. And I'm looking at this going, what the heck? That's interesting. She doesn't even give me no never mind. So I slow down because I don't want her to bolt in front of me and damage my car. So as I slow down, I happen to glance to my right, directly across from her in the ditch to the right on my passenger side. And there is a five-strand barbed wire fence on both sides of the road. So it's where she's at eating grass. It's kind of a big ditch with grass, and then there's a 5-strand barbed wire fence, then a row of trees, then an open field. And she's looking toward this open field with a bunch of deer. And then on the right-hand side, a similar ditch with grass, 5-strand barbed wire fence, and then just thick trees. There's no open field, just thick trees. And as I'm coming by her, I glance to my right. And as I glance to my right, I see the biggest wolf that's sitting on its haunches, upright. It looks like a statue. It's not even moving a muscle. It's gray and black. Lance, here's the part that I can't believe. And I'm sitting there on edge going, what? He said, this thing had to be about 6 feet tall, sitting down on its haunches. Sitting down to the top of its head, it had to be about 6 feet tall. And I said, what? He said, yeah, I'm not kidding. He said, and then I said, tell me some details. He said, I asked him, I said, did you see ears? He said, yes, it was pointing straight up. He said, the eyes were like black. It had a gray and black coat. He said, I asked him about the width from shoulder to shoulder across the chest. He said, if I was going to guess, about 24 to 30 inches across the front. He said the front arms were huge. He goes, it was long. He said, sitting down, he said, it didn't twitch a muscle. At first I thought it was just a tree, but he said, they really manicure the ditches in that area. It's all grass. There's no trees on the inside of the fence toward the roadside. All the trees and the shrubbery is on the outside of that 5-strand barbed wire fence. And I said, right. And he goes, initially, when I first glanced, I thought it was a cedar tree. And then I realized, oh my gosh, that's a wolf. He said, this thing didn't twitch a muscle. It didn't flicker an ear. It didn't move its head. He said it was directly across from this deer. And he said, I looked at it, and I'm staring at it. I'm trying not to wreck. And about that time, there's a curve that goes down the hill. So I pass it. I get up speed, and I said, I got to take a look at this. So he goes down the hill. He gets turned around, comes back. And he's coming back the hill. It took about 5 minutes, he said. And as soon as he came up, that deer that was standing on the left side, which is now on the right, is grazing, eating grass. It's not agitating anymore. And he looked across, which was initially to the right side. Now it's the left side, was gone. He said, I knew I saw what I saw when I didn't see that anymore. He said, Lance, this was daytime still because our times are changing. The spring is coming. I saw everything. It had this dog. He said, think of the biggest dog in the world you can see in ×3. I said, you've got some dogs. About how big compared to your dogs do you think this thing was? How much weight do you think that had? And he goes, Lance, I'm going to say conservatively at least over 300 pounds, maybe 375, somewhere in that range, maybe even 400. This thing was huge. He said if on all fours you could put a saddle on it. He said, I'm not trying to make fun here. I'm trying to be serious. I'm just freaked out. And he was telling me, and he was getting excited, explaining this to me. And he said, Lance, I've never seen anything like this. is that what he said, is that what so-and-so, saw? His wife? I said, yeah. Yeah, that's what they saw. He goes, God darn it, this thing is big. I said, I know. He said, I need you to come out here, Lance. We need to take some measurements, and I'll show you exactly where it was at. And I said, yeah, we'll do it. We'll go out. We'll take a measurement. And I said, well, here's the thing. He said, what do you think I came upon? And I said, well, here's my 2 cents. I can't prove this, but what I think you came upon, I think you came upon an ambush. I think that this Dogman creature was right there the whole time, and I think what had happened is that it was working its way. When you see one, there are others, and the others were pushing it into this one, and this one was there to begin with, and it was just deadly still, and it was waiting for that deer to be pushed over, and as soon as it got pushed over, it was going to grab it and take it down, and that's what you drove upon. You drove upon an ambush, in my 2 cents. Again, I can't prove it, but it sure sounds like it. And they had kind of isolated this doe away from the herd. And it could have been right in that tree line. You'd have never seen it on the other side of that fence. He says, well, that's true too. He goes, this darn thing blended in so well, Lance. Had it not been sitting on its haunches in the open in that ditch, I'd have never saw it if it had been another 5 feet into that tree line on the other side of that fence. I said, I know. They blend in really, really well. He said, Lance, that's only 2 miles from my house. I said, well, that almost tells me that what my buddy's wife and their son-in-law and their daughter saw, it kind of confirms then, especially what you saw. This is a route. They've been in this area. What's interesting is that I said, tell me this, just out of curiosity. Have you seen any unusual vehicles in this area, blacked out windows or anything? He said, yeah. Actually, I saw a bunch last summer. They were running in a pair of 2. There were 2 SUVs. I thought that they were like OSBI vehicles for drugs out here or something. I said, well, that's possible. But with these sightings, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that they're affiliated with these creatures. These are government boys out there, and they're looking. I said, just for another question here, I said, have you seen any helicopters in the area or drones? He said, matter of fact, we did. We've had a lot of helicopters out here. Now, it's at night, so I'm not looking up at the sky, and it's dark, so I can't see anything, but we have had helicopters in this area. And I thought they were doing just maneuvers or something, or someone's just flying around. He said, so I've never really associated anything. He said, but not only that, but last summer we had some drones out here, and I just thought it was the neighbor kids, but they were awful big drones. He said, the crazy thing is, Lance, where I work in Tulsa, we use drones for surveying, and they're like $50,000 drones, and we can't fly them in 20-mile-an-hour winds because we've had them wrecked before, and that's a lot of money to wreck these things. He said, the drone that I saw, there was 40-mile-an-hour winds that day, and this drone was a side wind, and it was flying like it was nothing. I mean, it was just getting it. And it was just, there's no way. Had we had a drone like that, it'd have been down. He said, this drone, no problem. It was flying right sideways into the wind and then out of sight over the trees. I said, well, I wish I knew more about drones there, but I'm going to tell you, I really think all this is related to what you just saw and what your neighbor saw, which is my buddy and his family saw. I think these have been in that area who knows how long, and it's very interesting to me when you see these Dogman creatures that you see these government boys in the area. I don't know what it is or how they know they're there. I don't know. It leads into a lot of other questions I can't answer, but we're wanting to find out more. And so I'm going to go this week and meet up with him out there. We've had a hard rain, so I'm not sure if we're going to find any tracks. But we're going to go out there, and I'm going to film it, and I'm going to show you guys where he saw what he saw, how big. We're going to take the tape measure to it, and he's going to describe step by step what he saw, and I'll bring it to you guys. So we're kind of on this mission to figure out these creatures just like anyone else, but many people say, Lance, where can I go to investigate these creatures? I want to give you guys a warning that go do this. I know investigations are exciting. It's intriguing and everything. I agree with you. But there's one thing I want to place is a high degree of danger with these creatures. when there's one, there's more than one. There's a lot we don't know. And we, being avid outdoorsmen and hunters and trackers, we even have a high degree that we're wired pretty tight when we go out. So you want to have contingency plans. You don't want to go alone. You've got to take this serious. I would suggest never to pick a fight. Don't go out to hunt them. You might be in deep water fast. You might get what you wish for if you're not careful. And where there's one, there's more than one. And you don't get to choose if there's 1, 2, 5, or 10. So please use extreme caution. If any of you decide to go looking for these things, I would not. In addition to that, we don't understand a lot of these creatures. That's why we're going out to try and understand for you guys, so we can learn, we can get some film if we're lucky enough. And so, again, a lot of people say, where can I go? I'm going to tell you, look in your backyard. Sometimes literally, but sometimes not too far. Where this happened from where I live is about 22 miles away. There was a sighting only 2 miles from my house. Twice in 1 year. So where to look? If you truly want to look, which I don't recommend, sometimes in your backyard. Be careful. I think my brothers and I all agree, as well as Wiley, that people would be surprised, absolutely terrified, if they knew what was roaming around at night when they're asleep, in their backyard, on their property, in the alleyways, on the edges of town. They would be totally shocked. Thank you guys for listening. I appreciate you guys more than you'll ever know. And thank you for listening to another show of Cryptid Brothers Investigations of Oklahoma. Take care, guys.